Hello everyone, and welcome to the Tome of Silver, the show where I randomly select a game from my collection, review it, and add it to an ever-growing ranking list. The Final Fantasy series is truly one that needs no introduction to anyone with even a passing familiarity with video games. This line of anthological fantasy role-playing games is one of the single best-selling series of video games ever made. It continues to hold strong today, with its most recent titles, Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, both being met with massive praise. This is no small feat, especially for a franchise that's been around as long as FF has, dating all the way back to its original title in 1987, Final Fantasy for the NES. Despite receiving massive amounts of praise upon its release, these days I find the NES original a very difficult game to recommend. Aside from its Nintendo hard levels of challenge and tedium, it also has a bunch of bugs and glitches that make several mechanics not work as they're supposed to greater and lesser degrees of frustration. The channel Project Mutt Entertainment has a great and super comprehensible video on all these bugs, so if you're curious, I strongly recommend you go check it out, link in the description. There's always merit to going back and experiencing something as it originally was, and the NES game is more than playable. That said, that combination of difficulty alongside the cavalcade of minor gripes can make the NES game messy, and not particularly attractive for casual audiences wishing to experience Final Fantasy's roots. Luckily, Final Fantasy has had quite a few remakes and remasters over the years. Many of these, outside of just improving the visuals, cleaned up many of the bugs and made it more accessible to a general audience. This extends from the PlayStation all the way to modern consoles with the Pixel Remaster. As to which of these is the de facto superior way to play Final Fantasy, I couldn't say. Some may love the Dawn of Souls port to the Gameboy Advance for its additional content, while others criticize it for being too easy and flock instead to the Final Fantasy Origins version on the PlayStation 1. If you're looking for a breakdown between the many different ports, that's not what this video is about, and there are plenty of videos and discussion forums on the topic. For this video, we'll be focusing on the version released for the PSP, referred to as Final Fantasy 20th Anniversary Edition. So ready your crystals, face the forces of chaos, and let's turn the page to Final Fantasy for the PSP. In the land of Cornelia, the world has begun to fall into ruin. Dangerous storms brew throughout the sky, the sea swallows up the land, and the earth has started to decay, slowly plunging the world into darkness. However, an ancient prophecy tells that when the world is in its most dire hour, 4 warriors of light, each bearing a crystal, will appear to save it. The 4 warriors of light will be your party throughout the adventure, and you can both name them and choose their class from one of 6 options, each naturally having their own particular specialty. You can select your party composition however you wish, and there are no limits to each class either. So if you prefer to have a party consisting entirely of magic-wielding black mages, you are free to do so. However, once you've started the adventure, there's no way to change our heroes' classes, so you'll likely want to try and keep the party balanced with what they can do, which is how I prefer things anyways. And so, the 4 warriors of light march forth. Blinky, the aggressive yet determined warrior. Inky, the bashful but steadfast monk. Pinky, the kind-hearted white mage. And of course, who could forget Clyde? Though he may be a free spirit and a bit of a daydreamer, he's nevertheless honest, dependable, brave and true. Together, these 4 heroes arrive at Castle Cornelia, where they meet its king. After we show him our crystals as proof of our identities as the Warriors of Light, he wishes to test our abilities before he entrusts us with the responsibility of saving the world. The Princess of Cornelia, Sarah, has been taken captive after the finest knight in the kingdom, Garland, had been corrupted by evil and a lust for power. Garland demands the king give him control over the kingdom in exchange for the life of the princess, awaiting an answer at the Chaos Shrine. The heroes are told that Cornelia has attempted to save Sarah, however Garland managed to repel their entire army. Can we really do this? I know we're the legendary heroes and all, but if an entire army wasn't enough, do the 4 of us really have what it takes to...
Alrighty then.
With Princess Sarah saved, The king acknowledges us as the heroes of prophecy, and our true objective is made clear. Though all 4 warriors possess a crystal, their light and color are dim. To return peace to the world, the crystal's light needs to be restored. The only way to do that is to find and slay the 4 fiends of chaos, powerful elemental monsters responsible for the various blights placed upon the land. Steeling themselves with a long journey ahead, Blinky, Inky, Pinky, and Clyde set out to save the world. For its debut, Final Fantasy takes a less is more approach to its storytelling, and leaves many details open-ended, allowing the player to fill in the gaps and kinda make their own tale out of it. You don't have any game-changing choices, alternative endings, or anything like that. Remember, this is a game from the 80s after all. But take for example the Warriors of Light. They have no personality or even dialogue to speak of, making them essentially the world's deadliest pieces of cardboard. But by giving them names and stapling these made-up personalities to them, I was able to have some fun with it, and imagine an experience uniquely my own. If you're hoping for a very direct story, you won't find too much here. The narrative is more in the background, and barely any NPCs you meet along the way even have names. If you don't mind using your imagination a bit, then there's some fun to be had here. Where it lacks in characters, there is a good amount of world building as you venture to different towns. I especially was interested in the Lufenians, an ancient race that once lived in a city in the sky, before the Fiend of Wind, Tiamat, forced them back to the ground, where they no longer speak the same language as everyone else in the world. It makes what's otherwise a fairly bare-bones RPG setting into something more interesting, and encourages players to speak with each townsfolk they come across. And that's something you'll want to be doing anyways. The best way to describe the progression of Final Fantasy I is like a series of fetch quests. The main goal is to defeat the 4 fiends, but each of them reside within dungeons that require a particular method of reaching. Doing this usually necessitates listening to various NPCs' requests, and searching for another dungeon to try and find some sort of item, and usually this results in a series of handing off important items. For example, the Prince of Elfheim, the City of Elves, has a Mystic Key, which is necessary to gain access to particular doors. However, a spell has been cast on the prince, which has caused him to fall into a never-ending slumber. To wake him, we require the Jolt Tonic, which can be obtained by a witch named Montoya. But for her to give us the Jolt Tonic, we need to find her stolen Crystal Eye. The Crystal Eye is being held by a dark elf known as Astos. Yeah, sure, I'll believe that's an elf. But Astos is disguised, and we can't get him to reveal himself without first finding the crown, which is hidden within the Marsh Cave dungeon. Reaching the Archfiend requires the completion of a bunch of these mini-tasks, which often have you going back and forth all across the world, and keeping track of where everything is can get a bit overwhelming. But if you're talking with NPCs, they're very good about telling you, or at least providing relatively helpful hints, of what you should be doing and where you should be going. So as long as you have a decent memory, or write down the clues provided, you shouldn't find yourself getting too hopelessly lost. A fact which I actually found surprising, given that this is a retro RPG, which are known for being a bit obtuse sometimes. So you won't need a guide if you decide to give this game a whirl, but there were some areas where I found having a guide made things more comfortable. To speak with the Lufenians later down the line, you require an item called the Rosetta Stone. Which reminds me, this video is sponsored by Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone can be found in the Sunken Cavern, but it's pretty easy to miss if you're not exploring every nook and cranny. The dungeon is large and has lots of winding hallways, and with the continuous random encounters, searching every inch of it can get a bit exhausting. I prefer not to miss the stone on my first trip to avoid needing to go back. So a guide isn't necessary, but if you want it, there are definitely some areas where it can make things more comfortable, so make the decision that works best for you. The way Final Fantasy handles exploration is commendable, doing a very good job of giving players enough time to understand how the game works before really opening up and allowing them to explore. When you first begin your quest, you're confined to the first continent, which only has a handful of locations to visit, so you're unlikely to get lost. After that, it won't be long until the party acquires a boat, letting them sail the sea, but only allowing them to enter land via these ports. This grants a greater sense of freedom, but still confines them a bit so they can't get too wild. By the time the player acquires the airship, which allows them to fly virtually anywhere they want, they've become familiar enough with the world and where things are located that this complete sense of freedom won't be overwhelming. It's an excellent way of allowing the player to explore to their heart's content, but still making it not too difficult to find where they need to go next without an obnoxious red arrow pointing to where they should be heading. The world, people, and monsters of Final Fantasy take clear inspiration from classic D&D, giving everything a retro, almost refreshingly straightforward high fantasy vibe. You have humans, elves, dwarves, goblins, rakshasas, dragons, pretty much all the essentials you can think of, Final Fantasy has it. That high fantasy feeling is bolstered by the gorgeous visuals of the updated sprite work. The original Final Fantasy had a lot going for it at the time, but there really is no beating the crisp, revamped visuals that have been pretty much perfected in the PSP version. The biggest improvement has to be in the battles. The original had the characters standing in a solid black background, likely to have the characters and enemies pop a bit more. In the PSP version, backgrounds now reflect the environment you are currently traveling through, and it goes a long way to add that little something to combat. Speaking of adding something, we can't talk about the presentation without bringing up the fantastic musical score, bringing new renditions of the classic tracks. Hearing all the music recreated with the PSP's improved sound chip allows for a new appreciation of the music, and there's really no underselling how much of Final Fantasy I's themes will go on to be iconic series staples, from the victory theme to the battle music. In combat, battles take place in a typical turn-based fashion, where you select all 4 of your party members' attacks at once, and you'll watch both you and your opponent trade blows, with the order of when your attacks come out being tied to the respective character's speed. Much of how you'll need to approach battles is tied to your party composition, based on what classes you selected for your party. As mentioned in my earlier introduction, my party consisted of a warrior, monk, black mage, and white mage. The warrior is probably the best class in the game, and is pretty much essential to have in the party. They deal great damage and have just as good defense, possessing a fantastic balance of being able to dish out the pain and being able to take it. The monk is the highest damage dealer in the game, with his attacks when not equipped with any weapons shredding through enemies' HP. However, they can't equip any armor, which makes their defense rather low, meaning they can fall just as quickly. Having a monk does save you a lot of money in the early game though, since you don't need to buy much equipment for him, allowing you to buy more essential tools without needing to grind. The black and white mages, as their names imply, are the magic users of the classes. They're not able to deal much physical damage and are rather squishy, but they have access to a range of spells. The black mage specializes in damage dealing magic, while the white mage is more suited for healing and stat buffs. Remember my comment about Final Fantasy being D&D inspired? Well, in the NES original, spells used a similar spell slot system as Dungeons & Dragons too, but this was changed in later ports to just use an MP system. Spell levels are still a thing, but now it just imposes a limit on what spells you can equip. Mages can acquire spells ranging from level 1 all the way to level 9, which can be learned by purchasing them from the magic shops, found within different towns. In a town, you may have the choice between, say, 5 second level spells, but there's a limit to 3 spells per level, so you'll want to think carefully about how useful the spell will be in the long run, and if it's worth taking it over another potentially more helpful ability. The other 2 classes are the Red Mage and Thief. The Red Mage is the middle ground between the Black and White Mage, being able to learn spells from both pools of magic, but they can't learn higher level spells like the Black Mage's heavy hitting Flare, so that's the price you pay for having a little bit of everything in one character. The Thief, unfortunately, is just the worst class in the game. They don't hit very hard and just have very poor stats all around. Their biggest boon is making it easier to flee from battle, but this wasn't something I really ever struggled with anyways. There is a point later on where you can complete a dungeon called the Citadel of Trials, which upon finishing, will change the party's classes into something more powerful. This will turn the Thief into a ninja, which can learn some black magic as well as allow them to equip a substantially larger pool of equipment, making them stronger by a wide margin, but even then, they still fall heavily behind the other available classes. Still, being able to choose the classes and being able to select multiple of the same class adds good replay value, allowing the player to replay with a different party composition, or even do challenge runs if they're insane, like a White Mage or a Thief only run. Though really, no matter what combination you choose, you won't be in for too difficult of a time. The early game can start off a bit tricky solely due to not having as much equipment and spells for your party, but it won't take long for you to acquire an entire royal vault's worth of gold. and because the PSP version changed spells to use MP instead of slots, as well as adding ethers to be purchased in the shop which restores MP, continuous use of magic spells to heal and dish out the damage becomes a cinch. Some statuses like Stone, which renders a party member permanently unusable until cured, would change to be much easier to heal from, and overall, the PSP version is just more comfortable to get through. A benefit to the toned down challenge was I rarely needed to grind for experience. I still chose to do so, mind you, usually because whenever I reached a town with higher level spells for purchase, I would want to get them right away, and your mages needed to be a certain level to get higher level spells. This made almost all the bosses go down in a handful of turns, and I had enough gold that I could buy 50 healing potions and ethers each, ensuring I would never so much as have a chance of getting a game over. But honestly, even if you go at your own pace and avoid grinding altogether, you won't find yourself sweating during combat encounters. If you're looking to see the Final Fantasy world and get the basic experience without too much of a fuss, the PSP version is definitely the way to go. But if you're looking for something to really challenge you, you may wish to consider investigating some of the earlier versions. Another benefit to the PSP version is that it includes 2 additional secret dungeons which do add that extra bit of difficulty, one introduced in the GBA version that was carried over, and the second being completely new for the PSP, giving it the most amount of content of the different iterations available. But considering these are endgame dungeons, playing through a relatively easy game just to get said challenge may not be worth the time investment for some. Final Fantasy for the PSP is a wonderful way to experience the RPG that started it all. While the decrease in challenge won't be for everyone, a lot of heavy lifting was done to bolster everything else. Phenomenal sprite art and music amps up the presentation, and the changes to spells makes for a far more comfortable experience. The lack of story is just how Final Fantasy was, and you'll get that no matter what version you buy, but there's still enough world building to make it worth someone's while to explore and experience. Final Fantasy will claim the number 30 spot. I really struggled to decide if it would pass Octopath Traveler or not, but when I broke it down, Octopath and FF1 have very similar strengths and weaknesses, only Octopath's art style and world were more alluring to me. As such, Final Fantasy 1 will not proceed any higher. All in all, Final Fantasy 1 isn't the best in the series, far from it honestly, but there's certainly enjoyment to be had, and it's always nice to be able to appreciate a series' roots. Or an updated version of said roots at least. And that concludes our look at the anniversary edition of Final Fantasy 1. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving a like and commenting your thoughts below. What was your first experience with Final Fantasy 1? Is there a particular port that stood out to you, or do you think the NES original is the definitive version? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Next time, we'll be looking at a movie tie-in game. 2 in fact. Remember those days? When so many films would have some video game tie-in to capitalize on the release? Well, we'll get to relive a bit of those days in the next video. In the meanwhile, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. May we see each other again when we turn to the next chapter in the Tome of Silver.